Broomfield's June 16th, 2026 study session. Agendas for study sessions, including concept reviews, can be found by visiting Broomfield's website at broomfield.org. There are 8 council members in attendance with 2 on the way. Our agenda this evening includes 1 concept review and 1 study session item. The public may participate in public comment on the concept review only, either in person or through our call-in service. Visit broomfield.org/council meetings to learn step-by-step instructions on how to use the call-in service. Public comment will be limited to 90 minutes total per item. The first 1 through 15 participants in the queue have 3 minutes to speak. The next 16 through 25 have 2 minutes, and if time remains, the next 26 plus have 1 minute to speak. For our hard of hearing residents present, we have wireless headsets available in the back of the council chambers through our AV team. Our first item on the agenda is a concept review for a proposed planned unit development plan amendment to allow multi-unit residential on 2 properties located at 100 and 115 Edgeview Drive. This is the review of a concept application only. It's not a formal application for this project, and no decisions by council on this matter will be made tonight. When a formal application is submitted, it will go through the full approval process, including a land use review commission hearing and a council hearing. We'll follow the city's standard procedures for concept plan reviews. First, the staff will present a summary of the application. Following the staff summary, the applicant will make their presentation. We'll then take comments from members of the Land Use Review Commission and other interested advisory boards. Followed by public comment. Then the applicant will have an opportunity for final comments and finally questions and comments from council. Electronic copies of concept review plans are available at broomfieldvoice.com. Copies of comments provided for each plan have been given to council and can be found in the correspondence folder linked in tonight's agenda. Council members have a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, community and council. Judy Hammer, our principal planner, will introduce us to this item. And then, as the mayor stated, the applicant is here, and then we'll entertain questions. Ms. Hammer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, City and County Manager Hoffman. Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. Judy Hammer, representing the Planning Division. Next slide, please. As the mayor indicated, this is a concept plan for a proposed amendment related to the Interlochen Advanced Technology Environmental Planned Unit Development Plan that would only apply to filing number 1 and filing number 24. Next slide, please. These subject properties are located at 100 Edgeview and 115 Edgeview Drive, north of Interlochen Loop and west of Wadsworth Boulevard. The comprehensive plan designation for these subject properties is mixed-use commercial, as shown on this slide. Next slide, please. The proposed PUD plan amendment would allow multi-unit residential on the subject properties. The amendment would also add 345 residential units, revise public land dedication requirements, and the parking to comply with the current Broomfield Municipal Code for off-street parking. Council Mayor Pro Tem Lim asked a couple of questions, and I'm going to address them here in this presentation. To give a little more detail regarding the parking, the PUD plan provides for 1.5 spaces per each bedroom unit plus 0.5 spaces for additional bedroom. The ratios are relatively comparable to the Broomfield Municipal Code off-street parking requirements. However, they do not, the PUD does not require guest parking spaces, whereas if we did an amendment to include the parking, we would ask that it would include an allowance for guest parking similar to what the Broomfield Municipal Code requires, which is 1 guest parking space for every 8 units. So that would allow for that. As mentioned in the staff report, currently the PUD plan establishes the PLD calculation at $43,560 per acre, which is below the current calculation of $86,000 per acre. So we identified that. Next slide, please. This slide shows an example layout that was provided by the applicant of how 36 townhomes may fit onto this lot at 100 Edgeview Drive. And again, it's an example. It just kind of gives us an idea of what to evaluate. And then the next slide. This slide shows an apartment complex with 309 units and how the parking could lay out with some amenities. Again, an example, and not part of this concept plan. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the adjacency to the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport and approximately where the lots lie within the airport critical zones. Again, it's an approximation because we're zoomed out. Next slide, please. Notices were accomplished per the Broomfield Municipal Code. Before an application for a formal development review to amend the PUD plan, the applicant is required to host a neighborhood meeting. Staff has identified the following key issues as part of the concept plan review. The proximity to the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, and that was discussed in detail in the staff report. And by changing the land use from commercial to residential, staff has indicated that there will be potential negative impacts to the city and county of Broomfield. Public land dedication, as I discussed earlier, is established by the Interlochen PUD plan at 43,560 acres for cash in lieu. This should be updated to align with the Broomfield Municipal Code calculations. And then that would be calculated at the time of building permit for the first building permit issuance. Okay, next slide. And this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant is here to present the application in more detail, and I'm also available for questions should you have any after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The applicant's presentation is next. Will the representatives please identify themselves for our listeners before beginning your presentation?
Thank you very much, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council, members of city staff, and members of the public. My name is Carolyn White with Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, and I represent JP Colorado Land, the owner of the properties at 100 and 115 Edgeview. And in a moment, I will introduce the rest of the members of our team, as well as the principal of JP Colorado Land, who will be giving his portion of the presentation virtually. And I believe he is already online to do that, so thank you. So as has already been noted, but I just want to reiterate, obviously, we understand this is a concept plan review, right? So you're not making any decision here today, but we are here to present to you our ideas about why we think this property would be most suitable to be rezoned with a PUD amendment to allow residential uses on the site. So that's what we're going to present to you today, the reasons why we think that's appropriate here, and address maybe some of the criteria that you would ultimately consider in the event of an actual rezoning application is submitted. May I have the next slide, please? So this is an overview of our presentation. We're going to give a little background about the site. We are going to briefly touch on a fiscal impact analysis that the applicant had prepared, understanding that that is an issue of concern to the city and county of Broomfield, and share that information with you. Talk a little bit about, like I said, about the ultimate decision-making criteria for the PUD amendment. We want to also present some market data and information, as we think that is really compelling to understand the reasons why this proposal is being brought forward at this particular time. Next slide, please. Next slide. This slide shows some of the members of our team who are here tonight. Myself, Chris Crawford with Hines, Colorado, John James with JP Colorado Land, who's going to testify virtually, Peter Wall with Wall Kane Consulting, Jessica Matthews, also with Hines, and my colleague Nina Sawaya at Brownstein. Not all of the folks listed on this slide will be part of the presentation, but we are all available to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. All right, so before we get into detail on the background of this slide, at this time, I would like to ask that we allow Mr. James to speak virtually. He's going to give a little bit of an overview of the history of this parcel as it relates specifically to the PUD at Interlochen over the last 25 years.
Thank you, Ms. White. We'll go to our remote presenter. You want to change screen so we can see him? Or do
Can
we
you hear
need-
me?
Can we do a split? screen?
We can hear you.
Can we do a
Okay.
box screen?
Want me to go ahead?
Sure, please. We have the
Okay, can I-
slides.
Can I be seen? I don't know if I can be seen. I don't know if it's important.
We can't see you. We're looking at the slide, John.
Would you
Okay,
prefer to
No, no,
us
no,
to
no,
look at
that-
you?
that's quite all right. That's quite all
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Uh, Well, listen, I'll go ahead. Members of the council and staff, I'm John James, the general partner of JP Colorado Land, which is the applicant for this amendment to allow multifamily apartments on these two parcels. We'll have Carolyn, Peter, and Chris make our presentation, but I want to make a few comments. Our predecessor, the Boswell Company, in the mid-1990s, conceived the PUD for Interlochen to be an advanced technology office project like those developed in the 1980s and early 1990s in Silicon Valley. No housing or other amenities, just major office users. They were fortunate to attract several major office users, initially including Sun Microsystems, now Oracle, and Level 3. Its successor is now vacated, Interlochen. In 2000, we acquired 125 acres, the last undeveloped land, excluding land under option with Sun and Level 3 from Boswell. We anticipated demand from other high-tech users that would allow us to make a decent profit selling the land within 5 to 10 years. We couldn't have been more wrong. Within a year, the office market conditions began a dramatic contraction caused by several major events. First, the dot-com bust in 2001, collapse of the financial markets in 2008, COVID in 2020, and now AI, which is eliminating many office jobs. In 26 years, we have sold just 25 acres that have been developed into office projects, and these have not been financially successful. The major high-tech users are either gone or subletting their space. Market conditions for multi-tenant office buildings are terrible. My message, 30 plus years after conception, Interlochen is not and never and likely never will be a high-tech office park. Office development will be non-existent for the foreseeable future. Since 2000, there have been 5 apartment townhouse projects successfully developed, and there continues to be demand. I ask the council members to consider the realistic market conditions in Interlochen and approve our application to amend the PUD to allow apartments on the 100 and 115 Edgeview Drive parcels. Developing these remaining well-located, highly visible vacant office parcels into apartment projects will benefit both Interlochen and Broomfield much more than having them sit empty for another 26 years. I appreciate your consideration. I'm available for any questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Ms. White.
Right, thank you. So this slide that we're showing here is just a sort of bullet point chronology of some of the highlights of the events that John just described to you, just so you have a visual representation of that. May I have the next slide, please? One more. All right, so you have the site context already, as Ms. Hammer presented in her presentation. Just to reiterate, we've got 2 parcels that we're talking about here, 100 Edgeview at 3.8 acres and 115 Edgeview at 10 acres. So obviously 115 is about 3 times the size of the other. They're kind of kitty corner from each other, not immediately adjacent in the traditional sense. The smaller one is currently designated for retail in the PUD, and the larger one is currently designated for office. Next slide. So we are proposing an amendment to the PUD to allow for residential uses. And just to be clear, we're not proposing to eliminate the other allowed uses. In the event that a tremendous office opportunity came along, it still could potentially be taken advantage of if it hasn't already sold for residential. But as Mr. James pointed out, you know, they've been marketing it consistently for a very long time and have not had any indication that there is any kind of demand for those particular types of uses. So we want to add, we're proposing to add residential to the mix. We are proposing to market it to multi-family developers. And as you'll hear in a little bit later in our presentation, there is already some interest in that regard from potential developers. So next slide. Again, concept review, right? We're just talking about the zoning. The applicant will not be the ultimate vertical developer, but we're also very aware that it's a little bit hard to visualize sometimes when you talk about just zoning in the abstract. And so for purposes of this conversation with you, we did have prepared some conceptual site plans of what could be developed just in terms of like a yield study, how much could fit nicely on the property, looking at a couple different product types. So for the smaller property here, we're talking about potential townhomes, just like was described by Ms. Hammer in her presentation. And so we've got a site plan rendering of what that could look like and how that could fit on the site. We've also got some representative visuals here showing some other townhomes that have been developed by the property owner team to give you an idea for what type of product we're thinking about could be located here. Next slide. This is the other parcel, the larger parcel at 115 Edgeview. Again, looking at this as more of a multifamily opportunity, approximately 309 apartments. This is one potential layout that clearly demonstrates it could accommodate that level of density with sufficient parking and with appropriate amenities, setbacks, and open space and so on. And these are, again, some examples of representative product types that could be developed on this property. Next slide. So, you know, what we think is going on here and what is driving this request is at the same time, there's been a decline in the demand for most types of office and most types of retail. There's also obviously been an increase in the demand for housing and the need for housing. And these are some excerpts from your 2023 Housing Needs Assessment Study. I don't really have to quote these to you. I know you're all very familiar with them, highlighting the need for additional housing within the city. And I think a couple of the key takeaways here is severe shortage of affordable housing, multifamily and affordable housing production remains a priority. And it's not listed on this slide, but one of the other components in that study talks about having a diversity of housing types, right? And that's what we're talking about here is with these two parcels, since one of them is significantly smaller than the other, creating the opportunity for there to be multiple housing types right here in this location, you know, connected to each other. Next slide. So now I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about the fiscal impact analysis. We know that this is something of concern to the city when we're talking about converting commercial land to residential land. Obviously, I've been here before talking to you about this very issue, and we know that the city has its own methodology for analyzing the potential fiscal impact on the city of that type of conversion. Anticipating that conversation, we also retained our own outside third-party consultant to do a fiscal impact analysis. It, you know, obviously is probably a different methodology than the city's. I did distribute the complete report to Ms. Hammer, and hopefully you have that in your packet available to you. But on this slide, what we're showing is a couple of highlights from that study. Unfortunately, the expert who prepared that study, Andy Arnold of Pioneer Development, is not able to be here with us tonight. So I'm going to play him on TV a little bit and share with you some of the highlights of the study. The big takeaway here is that over time, that there is a net positive fiscal impact to the city. It's modest, around $225,000 over a 25-year period. So it's not huge. But the study does talk about the immediate revenue that's payable to the city in terms of, you know, building permit fees, use tax, and so on, the ongoing property tax revenue that will be generated here, the sales tax revenue, which is a little bit harder to quantify, that we think will be generated by the new residents living here. And that does include online sales tax revenue as well, right, from online purchases. And so just want to highlight this as an additional data point for your consideration as you think about that long-term fiscal impact. Once the actual application is actually submitted, and we'll actually have Andy here and you can ask him some more questions. But I think the other thing that we wanted to point out relative to this analysis is that in our view, the baseline comparison condition is not what would office generate, right? Because it's vacant land right now, and it's going to remain vacant land, at least for the foreseeable future, based on all the market information that we have. And so we think the baseline comparison is vacant land. And by that comparison, this fiscal impact certainly is a more positive situation for the city compared to what the vacant land is generating today. Next slide. So then just briefly, I want to talk about the PUD criteria, and I'm not going to go through each and every one like I would if this were a quasi judicial hearing. But we do want to just highlight a couple things because that's ultimately the criteria by which you would be making this decision if it were brought before you as an actual rezoning application, right? It is rezoning, but it's also an amendment to an existing PUD. So we're talking about the PUD criteria as well as the rezoning criteria. So we've listed them all here, and I'm just going to speak directly to a couple of them. If I could have the next slide, please. And that is consistent with the overall intent of this section of the code, right? Innovations in residential development, meeting the demands of a growing population, greater variety in type, design, and layout of buildings. We think having the opportunity to develop residential on these properties would meet many of these overall purposes and goals of this section of the code. Building of new neighborhoods, conserves the value of the land, et cetera. Next slide, please. Broomfield Comprehensive Plan, just pulled out a couple of the key goals and policies that are in the comprehensive plan that would be supported by allowing this property to develop as residential property. Encouraging, supporting mix of housing types, range of affordability, creating neighborhoods, diverse population, and so on. Next slide, please. And then also, we wanted to touch on a little bit, and happy to answer this in more detail through questions if and to the extent that this is of interest to council. But we are obviously aware of the comments that were submitted by the airport. And in fact, as part of their comment letter, you may recall that they listed several specific measures that they would recommend be taken if this property were ever to be developed as residential. And that included things like disclosure notices to the future residents, incorporating required upgrades to building materials to ensure that there's a 25 dBA reduction from the exterior sound levels to the interior sound levels, and avigation easements, all of the things you normally do to try to mitigate when you have those types of uses in proximity to each other. And although our applicant, our property owner, is not the ultimate vertical developer, we can tell you that we will certainly ensure that any residential developer to whom this property is conveyed will be obligated to comply with all of those requirements. We understand them. We also have some comments in our cover letter, which you hopefully have had a chance to read, talking about the potential future of the airport. And we think that to some extent, the potential for noise conflicts may be mitigated if in fact that runway that is closest in proximity to the site is ultimately pulled out of service as a runway, which is certainly on the table, although as Rocky Mountain pointed out in their letter, it's not a done deal yet. But obviously there is an extensive report about that, and we can go into as much detail as you want to about that. I won't for right now. I just want to make sure you know that we are aware of this issue and we are willing and able to do everything that the airport is recommending in order to mitigate and address it. Next slide, please. And here's a summary of everything I just said. The developer will comply with the height requirements, comply with the other airport requirements, design specifications, proximity disclosures, and file all the required forms with the FAA. Next slide. One of the other criteria for rezoning or amending a PUD, adopting a new PUD, is maximizing positive impacts on neighbors. And so what this slide is summarizing is some of the ways that we think this slide is actually going to benefit the adjacent properties. It's going to take an underutilized and vacant site, develop it into something that is compatible and beneficial and consistent with the uses that are in the surrounding area. This property is a little bit unique given what's surrounding it and given its proximity to the highway and to other key thoroughfares. We think that increased housing supply will be of benefit to the already existing office and residential uses in the area in terms of allowing people to live closer to where they work and also support those existing retail businesses with more rooftops in close proximity. Also, through our team, we also engaged property owners and residents in the surrounding area. Even though I know a neighborhood meeting is required before we formally submit, informal engagement has been conducted prior to having this concept review, and we received positive feedback from virtually everyone that we spoke to. Next slide. Specifically, we want to point your attention to a letter that should be in the file. I have some extra paper copies if anyone desires them, from Camden Property Trust, which is the property owner of one of our immediately adjacent neighbors. They are the owner and developer of some residential that's nearby. And as you can see from this letter, they are in support of our proposal and in fact have a potential interest in becoming the developer, at least of the townhome units, if this if this property ultimately is rezoned. Next slide. All right, so then the last section here is to talk a little bit about the market conditions, and I would like to invite the representative from Hines to come up and speak from experience about that.
Thank you, Ms. White.
Remember, you have to tell them when to change yours
Okay.
because we don't have a clicker.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, city staff, appreciate the time today. We're going to talk about just the conditions of the market here. So next slide, please. Just a little bit about us. So we're a global developer. I run Colorado here. We've about 3.8 billion in assets and 107 people. This is our global experience. We are primarily known as an office developer. It's kind of our bread and butter. And I would say that nobody wants us to be built as office more than I do. And as we get into it, we'll explain why we just don't see that as being realistic. I think in addition to that, important to note that John and Hines have partnered on these parcels for over 2 decades. We built one office building, and that's the adjacent site. We've tried many times, and that I just think we've got a position here where there at the beginning of this was a thesis with some flaws, and now with COVID and AI, it's sort of a death knell to office. But next slide, please. This gives you more of our experience just in office in totality as a firm, with 163 million square feet of global development. Next slide. I think these slides are probably the most prominent and most important to show here. So I think if we look over this time frame, you see negative absorption pretty much every year. So what that means is that the net absorption of office tenants leasing in any given year has been less almost year over year. We also look at occupancy declining down to 80%. So there's significant vacancy. That's for the Broomfield market in totality. As we get into the more granular micro market, it actually is increased to 30%. Next slide, please. So we can point that out. I guess I got mine turned around. Go to the next slide real quick. So this is the immediate surrounding buildings. Again, 30% vacancy here. The demand has declined year over year. Of this immediate area, this is sort of these are the best office assets in the area. You've got rental rates that are about 50% of what would be required to make new construction pencil if the demand were there. In addition, on the high end, where buildings are trading in the existing asset classes here, they're about a third of what it costs to replace these. So very high vacancy, year over year decline in demand, rental rates that are half of what are required to make new construction pencil, and sales prices on existing assets that are a third of what it costs to even replicate them before you account for new profit. I don't think that we're going to see office demand in this submarket or this pocket in my career. And again, I would love nothing more than to build this as office. We've looked at this a bunch of different ways. There was actually one point where we evaluated self-storage, came before the council a long time ago. It wasn't something that y'all wanted to do. We've looked at this retail. The micro market, submarket, and totality for retail are also oversupplied. This particular location also does not bode well for retail. And so when you're evaluating this, I wouldn't think of it as what does the fiscal analysis say for another use. I would be thinking this is just vacant land in perpetuity, because that's likely what it is to be. That's not to say that something miraculous doesn't happen. People win the lottery, right? That does occur. So there's certainly a chance that that could change and something could occur. But from our opinion, we wouldn't build this as office. We would love to. We just don't have the demand. We don't have a way to do it. Same thing on retail. And we've been working with this with John for over 2 decades. If we go back one slide, and sorry for the resequencing. This shows the vacancy. So if you look at the yellow, those are rezones, those are developed. So those are in action. You've got more of a vibrant mixed use area here, live, work, play type environment. The remaining parcels here that are vacant land have the same zoning. And there's obviously some slope and environmental or and water and soil issues on a lot of these, which makes construction more expensive. But I think again, point here being is when you've been able to rezone to other uses, you do see the land end up getting developed. Other than that, this land I would expect to remain vacant for a very long period of time. Go forward 2 slides, please. And I don't know, are you on conclusions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I may though, could we just go back to slide 25 for one quick second? I want to add one other point to something that you said about that slide that had the blue and the yellow. Yeah, there we go. So one other takeaway that you can conclude from this slide is that if these 2 parcels outlined in red were converted from office to residential use, there will still be significant commercial opportunity in this submarket, right? With those other blue parcels. I mean, unless and until they come along and propose a rezoning as well. But the point is, we're not taking away the last possible commercial piece that exists in this submarket. So I think that's a really useful graphic for that point. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's get to the conclusion and get to your questions. Really, we think that the proposed amendment could satisfy all of the criteria for a PUD rezoning. Obviously, we don't get to some of the details of, open space and all that until we get to the site plan. But it either does satisfy or could satisfy all of the criteria. We think it's the right thing to do to be responsive to both declining office and retail market demand and increasing housing market demand. And so the applicant team, on behalf of the whole applicant team, I'll say we look forward to working with the city and county of Broomfield to working through that process. And for tonight, we look forward to answering your questions and taking your feedback on board. So thank you for your time and attention to this proposal.
Thank you very much, Ms. White and team. Are there any members of the Land Use Review Commission present tonight who would like to comment on the proposal? Any other of our boards, relevant boards or commissions? All right, we'll now proceed with public comments. If anyone would like to be heard on this item, please make your way to the podium. State your name and neighborhood for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
Hello, my name's Andrea Fetchko, and I live in Camden Flatirons, which is directly in between all those yellow dots that you saw. So the problem for me with this is the whole conversation about the positive impact on the community. If you look at the online concept review, you'll see 17 negative comments from the people who actually live there. To me, it's pretty transparent that this is all about money and selling the land and developing the land and selling the townhomes, not about making life better for me or my neighbors. My rent has not gone down in the past 3 years, despite a huge influx of apartments and townhomes within a 5-mile radius. You can think of the Arista area development. I used to live there, and then there was so much development. It was all concrete. It was very hot. I had to leave, and that's why I came to Camden. Because to me, that really exemplifies Broomfield, where there are beautiful views, there's open space, it's not highly congested, it's really a rare gem. In addition, Camden sits at the top of a hill. If you go down that hill, there are a ton of new apartments and townhomes for sale and for rent. Again, those are not all filled. And with those being there, my rent has still not gone down. And so, that all to say, I don't know how this would make the community better. It would actually take up more space. It would actually increase traffic. It would make my neighborhood a construction zone for the next 3 years. And we actually just had a construction zone for the past 2 years because the Novello apartments directly behind us were just built, 400 units, I think. And then Camden's also building 10 townhomes or something like that at the back of our property. So there is a lot going on a very tiny street that is really, really beautiful. And it seems to me this is just, well, the land's not getting sold. We need to do something with it. Just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Just because the land is there doesn't mean it has to be built on. There are coyotes, there are bunnies, there are all sorts of wildlife that we are pushing further and further away and destroying their environment. And that's extremely distressing to me. And another thing is just the climate crisis that we are in, not only as a state, but as the world. It didn't snow this winter. It's hotter than ever. It's windier than ever. Adding 2 huge plots of concrete is just making things worse. You know, we're really at this critical tipping point in time, and we have to take radical steps to do what we can. And that's what I love about Colorado, because it is very forward thinking. That's what I love about Broomfield. So I encourage you all to look at those online comments from the residents, because I think they all share my sentiment. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager, and staff. My name is Seth Patterson. I'm a resident of Ward 1, 40-year resident of Broomfield, and I'm a commercial real estate broker. I didn't come here for this presentation. I came for the study session, but that's related to housing, as you know. I haven't done the research these guys have, but they're right. It's just going to sit vacant, and that may not be a bad thing, but the owner needs to generate some income or do something with it. So I would support this proposal to the point of housing. I know this will not all be affordable housing, but some element of it will be, or there'll be a cash in lieu payment. As your Robert White Smith said so eloquently the other day in a presentation to the chamber, housing is a key element of economic infrastructure. There are other key elements, capital, a variety of things, but you have to have housing to have the labor. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Roxy Julia Lacamora. We need the density in order to get a grocery store and Arista. That's all I keep hearing. So these people that are coming and living on the south side of 36 do not have an easy access to a grocery store. Maybe the two developers need to work together and get that taken care of. Just considering that the fact that there is no place for these people to go and get groceries that's close at hand. There's no walking area or anything. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to be heard? We have someone online that would like to speak. We'll go to our caller next.
Caller number ending in 170. Please press *6 when prompted to unmute and state your name and neighborhood for the record.
Remind him again, press *9. What it is?
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. My name's Zach Whitaker, and I'm a resident of the Camden Flatirons apartments as well. And I share a lot of the sentiment with my first neighbor that presented here. I recognize that it is important for the city and community to be able to develop this land and generate income off of this currently vacant land. However, I also drive through the neighborhood every day on my way to work, and I see the new apartment complexes. Is it not live? Oh.
Are you there? Hello?
You should be back.
Hello?
Yeah, we're all listening.
Sorry.
Okay.
My fiance is listening in on the meeting, and I think it was delayed from the live stream. Apologies for the delay. I was sharing that I share the sentiment. I recognize the need to develop the land for revenue for the city and community. I was saying I drive through the neighborhood every day. I've seen the new development projects, many of which have signs posting or boasting vacancies. Adding yet further density to this already highly developed corner of the Interlochen Plaza at the end here will only add traffic. It'll take away from many of the marketable views that were mentioned from the community. They sell these units with the nice views over this open space as an upgraded charge, and adding concrete to that or buildings in front of that is going to kind of decrease the livelihood of the neighbors that live there, as well as decrease the ability for, of course, Camden to upcharge for those. I would love to see this zoned as more of a mixed use space. One of the literatures that was sent out cited a increasing demand for people to live, work, eat, shop where they can all be within a community. And I recognize that this is not an optimal space for retail here, but it would be nice to have sort of some small, more family-owned neighborhood businesses pop up around this area to support that idea of the living, working community.
All right. Does that wrap up your comments? Bye.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else? Did the applicant have any final comments based on those remarks? Okay. Well then, next are questions from council and feedback. So I'll ask my colleagues who would like to go first. Councilmember Delgadillo.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'll begin with a few questions. So, I want to ask, what is the pricing for the townhomes? Do we have an estimate for what they'd come out to?
Mayor, Councilor Carolyn White again. It would be impossible to determine at this stage of the game, right? It's not even zoned for residential right now.
Okay. It is really helpful to know because it gives us a sense as to whether this would be an accessible product for people, but I understand that that's a limitation right now.
I mean, it depends on if they're built next year or 5 years from now, or, right?
All right. And then the other question I have is I read through the projections and noticing that it stops at 25 years. Why did we choose 25 years as opposed to 30?
Again, I'm not the fiscal impact guy, but I read a lot of these reports. I work with a lot of those consultants. That's a really common time frame that we choose. It's the maximum length of time for Metro District bonds typically. It's the maximum time for tax increment typically. So when we want to look long term, a lot of times comp plans look out 25 years. So it's just I won't say arbitrary. It's a common accepted in the industry time period to use for long term.
Good to know. What happens to the projections if we go out to 30 years?
I could not answer that, but I could get the answer.
Okay, I can answer, and it goes negative. I'd like to point that out just based on the numbers and how they break down. So I did find that to be just kind of interesting there. And then the other thing is that I am concerned about the noise around here. I used to live in Arista. It is a very noisy area with the airport. So that is something, as the Ward 2 representatives, we have gotten numerous complaints from many of our residents about the airport and the airport noise. So one of my big concerns is that this is a very noisy parcel and people are going to be living there. So what are the plans for mitigation for that?
As was requested by the airport and was mentioned in that earlier slide, the airport is suggesting that the developer ought to incorporate building materials that would reduce the sound decibels from 25 dBA by 25 dBA from outside to inside. And we are agreeing that any subsequent development here would abide by that.
Okay, that's good to know. And I think the runway, I want to share that the potential for a runway being shut down, I don't think that completely mitigates my concerns. But that is really one of my main ones. And then the other thing is the cash in lieu rate for the income aligned housing. Are we planning on, we're aware that we need to hit the new rate of 86,000 per acre for the public land dedication?
For public land dedication, yeah,
sorry.
not housing, yeah.
Yeah.
We did see that note in the staff report. We have discussed it with staff, and I am assuming that when we come in with a subsequent actual application, that it would be proposed to make that change to the PUD as well as the change that we are proposing.
Okay, that's great to hear.
But
So.
I should just mention though, I think, we also need to coordinate with staff on this, but by our calculations, the public land dedication for this parcel has already been satisfied.
Okay, okay. Well, that makes sense. I guess we will discuss that further. And then I'll throw in my thoughts since I think I can squeeze those in pretty quickly. Ward 2 does have a lot of dense housing, and I think that's a perfectly valid product to put on the market. I personally live in a townhome, so I also think that's a perfectly valid product to have on the market. It is truly the noise and the fact that we get so many complaints about this, and I am concerned about putting another piece of residential, more residents who are going to be woken up when they're trying to go to bed, dealing with the noise. So that is my continued concern. I look forward to hearing more about this and more from my colleagues, but that is my main thing. Thank you.
I share my counterpart's concern about the noise, but I have other questions. There is a discrepancy between the developer's financial impact analysis and staff's data. Could staff address that difference in the calculations?
Mr. Romine is prepared for that. We spoke a little bit about that earlier. Mr. Romine.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, council members. As pointed out, the applicant did send a copy of their report to us yesterday, so I was able to look at it briefly this morning and just try to understand the differences because they oftentimes are. Obviously, as you can imagine, two economic analysis aren't going to agree to the penny or anything like that. I'd point out that there are several different assumptions and approaches that are being taken in the developer's analysis versus the one that we use here as common practice. The first off that I would just point out from a revenue standpoint that jumps out immediately is the treatment of how retail spending and therefore the sales tax is being counted. It is attributed to this development for 75% of the residential activity. So i.e. they first take off the online, which would be attributed to the site. We're doing that in our models also at this point. But then for everything that's being spent outside by the household, they're saying 75% will occur within the city and county of Broomfield, and therefore giving it to that point. So that's a little bit different than the way that we operate and that the way the models here have operated for over 20 years. So I point that out to begin with. The other side of it is then looking at the expenditures. That's the other one that really stands out. In their analysis, they did anticipate and bring in some costs related to our operating budgets, as well as some elements and some comments about the capital side. They are using different numbers than we would use. The example would be like public health or open space. They're saying roughly 25% of those costs should be attributed to the residential side. We normally do a much higher level because that's really where the services are being presented. So it's those types of things. The last item I'd point out that is the unknown, as the applicant has pointed out, is exactly what the price is going to be. They use some prices in the analysis, and so there is some element of that to calculate the property taxes. I would note, though, that those property taxes are as if they're all market rate units. Now, as you may recall from the applicant's presentation, they were talking about units that might be affordable, whether they be through cash in lieu or whether they be on site. That would adjust the property taxes down also. So we would see some likely reductions in the property tax and the sales tax on the revenue side, and we'd probably see a slightly higher level of expenditure side. So, to think about it from that standpoint, it would come out negative. And it'd be a question of how many millions of dollars negative over that period of 25 years or 30, depending on what this timeline is. That's how it encapsulate the differences between the two analysis without getting into very minor things. These are the big kind of overarching concepts.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And the, I did skim the study, from the developer. And it was interesting that there are some assumptions in there that the developer, its representative right now is not willing to commit to, I guess. So the financial impact study said that it assumed that the townhomes would be for sale products, and.
That's not correct.
Okay. Well, I see it in the fiscal impact study, okay? And that they would be a value of about $500,000. That was an assumption in the fiscal impact study. So, I mean, if it's not correct, then does that make a difference in our fiscal impact? Are we making any assumption about whether it's a for sale product or a rental product?
So Mayor Pro Tem, council members, as you may recall, we don't within our model necessarily talk about the price of items because we use an average housing price or basically a revenue gain. And so that we think about it in those terms. And so we think about the average, the three different housing types, the single family, the townhome, mid-density we call it, and the high density. And we don't necessarily put a price because in some cases across Broomfield, some are going to be, we'll call it 400,000 and some will be 700,000. So we're using effectively the property tax revenues that we're collecting for calculating what that basis would be, rather than doing it specifically to as they're doing within this model, which is appropriate oftentimes in these types of models where they're putting a price in. You are correct. The price that they're reflecting within at least the plan that I also saw this morning was a $500,000 price. And then if you recall, the apartments were approximately 351,000, if I remember the number correctly. So I did utilize those when checking their math to make sure, but that is something that they cited within their analysis and study. But again, that is not the method we use for determining what the property tax yield would be because we have to do it across the city since this is a Broomfield model as opposed to a specific site necessarily from that standpoint. We do that when we do take some analysis, but in this particular case, without any knowledge of what the pricing will be, as the applicant has pointed out tonight, we don't know what the price would be.
Mayor Pro Tem, that question is probably better geared towards the developer so that they could determine whether that's an accurate or inaccurate calculation based on their. Okay, would the developer like to comment on what I see clearly and so did.
Yeah, so we're partners with John, not necessarily the developer, right? John owns the land, partner with that. That doesn't mean we'll be developing here. That would be a very low price. Candidly, if this were for sale product, it would be significantly higher. The intent there is for rent, and then that would be the market assessment on a for rent product. So if you think of an apartment and then you make that apartment effectively double the size, that's what the townhome is doing. So it will have no impact whether it's for sale or for rent. It will be based on the market value. If it were for sale product, that number would be higher. The other thing, I think there was a discrepancy there of fee in lieu versus in-place units. That decision has not been made. So if the fiscal impact, which is sounding like that would be important and detrimental to the fiscal impact, if it was units in, we would intend to pursue a fee in lieu.
Okay. Thank you. On one slide in the developer's presentation, it claims that this would be a transit-oriented development. And I wanted staff to comment if they would define this as a transit-oriented development from their perspective, because I know it said it was at least a mile from any transit.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Lynn Merwin, Planning Director. Our Broomfield Comprehensive Plan, the 2016 plan, currently designates this property for mixed-use commercial, or mixed-use. Right? Mixed-use commercial, thank you. And so it does not designate it TOD or transit-oriented development. Those designations are typically much closer to our transit stations, so near the Broomfield station at 116th and Arista, original Broomfield, and then further northwest along US 36 near the, at the Flatiron Station. So we would not consider this a TOD property.
Okay, thank you. And then in the developer's presentation, there was there were some numbers that were related to the vacancy among the Class A office products in Interlochen. So the number that was thrown out there for that vacancy rate was 29%. So I assume the developer's ready to stand by that number. I'm also assuming that staff follows the vacancy rate in Interlochen. If that's the case, does staff agree with that 29%?
And let me clarify, and then I'd like staff to do that. And we do have a lot of market studies on this. Happy to provide a lot of backup detail. We actually have two vacancy numbers in there. So one is Broomfield in totality. It's an inverse because you would take the occupancy and subtract 100. And that's a little bit north of 20%. I think it's 22. We took the Class A office competitive set within Interlochen and what we call Outerlochen, not a technical definition, plus the views. So that's what you would be competing against here. And that is where the 29 or 30% comes from. So if you think of it as sort of the whole of the donut Class A product, what we would aspire to build as office, like 3 to 5 Interlochen, that type of product is roughly 30% vacant. If you expand that to the donut in totality and you include all asset classes, I think it's around 22.
Okay. And could staff confirm that that's what they're seeing? And then staff could also comment on something the memo states. So the memo states there is approximately 100 acres of vacant property remaining within this PUD plan for commercial development. And the developer pointed to other properties still open for commercial development also. So have there been any conversations with staff and developers on doing commercial on any of these properties?
Mayor Pro Tem, council members. So to address the first question, which is the vacancy number, that vacancy number is parallel to what we see within CoStar, which is the real estate database that is oftentimes used to cite different real estate classes. In March of 2026, for Broomfield itself is 23%. So very much in line with what the applicant is pointing out. We don't have a specific Class A in Interlochen number. I would suggest to you that it's probably in that same range and probably something that would be similar to what the applicant is pointing out. It's a little bit higher in that area, primarily through the analysis that we did. If you recall, 2 years ago, we engaged AECOM to do a study on that area, and we did find a significant amount of vacancy, soft vacancy and firm vacancy. And what I mean by that is occupancy, the lease is in place, but not necessarily people occupying the spaces because people are now working hybrid versus actual vacancy where there's not even a lease in place or an occupancy. So I wouldn't necessarily disagree with the numbers that have been cited by the applicant around vacancy. As far as the number of acres that are available, as the map points out, there are 2 major sites that are nearby. One is owned by Oracle, the largest of the sites. That is a piece of property that has been looked at by multiple people over the last few years. And thinking about it, there has been some conversations about that, as well as the other site that's nearby. So we do get those types of inquiries. There are people that are still looking in the market. And I'm sure that the folks at Hines know about them, as well as the other folks like at JLL and Newmark, who are also marketing within this area. We do get continuing interest in the area, but nothing has moved forward as pointed out in the applicant's presentation.
Okay, thank you. I guess this is for the developer. I'd like you to comment, well, you'd still have a neighborhood meeting to go. But when I read the comments on the Broomfield Voice page, I came away with the same conclusion as the Camden Flatirons resident, that those 17 comments were very negative. So would the developer like to comment on who you're talking to, that you came away with, yeah, positive feedback? Adjacent property owners were excited to welcome additional residential uses.
Good evening, council members. Peter Wall here on behalf of the applicant. So we had reached out to the actual property owners themselves, so whoever the ownership entity was, and that apartment building is owned by Camden themselves, as is the office building next door that has GoGo in it. That's owned by their own entity. So we were actually reaching out to the property owners themselves. Certainly after this step in the process, when we had that community meeting, residents would be noticed and we'd actually be interacting with them. But I think when we're talking about the positive reactions that we received, it was in our outreach to property owners, as evidenced by that support letter from Camden.
Okay, thank you. There were some comments that were slightly naive, actually, because they were assuming that that was going to stay open space forever, which is a common assumption of residents. But certainly they were negative comments to a large extent. So I think you will hear that from the neighborhood meeting. So my concerns are the noise, and my concern is still the fiscal impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to staff and the applicants for the presentations. I share my colleagues' concerns primarily about the noise as well as the financial impacts. But I have a question for the applicants. In the presentation, you focused a lot on there being no market for office property or additional, which is in line with what else we've heard, and the data, I think, shows that. And then you said, and also that's true for retail, which is not reflective of the other data that I've seen around this. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that, because only one of the parcels is zoned office. The other was retail, mixed use.
Yeah, a couple comments on that. So these parcels, if you look at the micro parcels themselves, they are not good retail parcels. So the parcel zoned for retail, we've actually looked at bringing in smaller shops. We've looked at sort of a mixed use concept. There's no demand for it. It's in a tucked in corner. It won't get the demand. It would end up being unsuccessful. And then if you drive around as well, there's a fair amount of retail vacancy, and rental rates are not conducive to new construction. I'm sure there's demand for things like grocery anchored shopping. We've heard that from one of the constituents. It just mathematically does not pencil right now to add new retail. And when we've looked at developments in the surrounding area, we've actually looked at shrinking that retail footprint to make the retail more vibrant because there's too much vacancy. That may not be true across in the totality of the municipality, but in what we're looking at for this development, it doesn't work. And then for this micro location, they're not retail corners.
That's interesting, given your presentation said, quote, "Property is unique given its location and access to key thoroughfares. It is a very busy corner and would seem to, me, that it could possibly be good for retail, especially since that is what it was zoned for. Did you consider at all doing a mixed use retail, residential or commercial space like the caller suggested?
So again, we've evaluated every use under the sun here in totality. And that's been going on for the past 2 decades. We've chased retail long and hard on that specific site. We've looked at retail, we've looked at single story office, we've looked at single story townhomes, self-storage, multifamily, you name it, we've run it. The demand for mixed use, I would love that to work. If you think of the equations, costs up, rates out, rents down, it won't pencil. I mean, a mixed use demand here those would be vacant shops and bankrupt within 18 months. There isn't enough density to support it. We've got other sites where we've added retail, and we've had challenges in our portfolio in totality on some of the retail. You have to really cater that the right way, and you need a lot more density than what's surrounding here. So we've looked at that in detail and don't believe in it. But again, like if we are not necessarily the end developer, we're partnering with the land ownership team here. If that's something that's encouraged and there are other people that see that vision, by all means, we think that would be something that they should pursue. We personally don't see that. And we've tried to look at it a bunch of different ways and invert this over and over again.
Right, thank you for those responses.
I thought I was later in the queue. Been trying to look at this proposal in terms of how we've responded to previous requests to make sure we're being fair. Because we did just approve a proposal for housing on land that had been commercial for 20 years and never developed. But we've also been panning some concept reviews where people wanted to switch from office to residential, largely because of concerns in the area, whether it was airport, firing range. And in this case, I'm hearing from my Ward 2 colleagues, there's concerns about noise. But I wanted to, in that vein, my point is we've been kind of picky about housing. We don't need a lot more housing necessarily. We've got like 5,000 units approved and 2,700 under construction, a lot of them on the high end. So we're getting picky about wanting more affordable housing. So let me take another attempt at the rent question. I assume, and this is correct, you are anticipating market rate for these apartments and townhomes.
So again, not the end developer here, but if we look at sort of where the market demand is, we've developed in the area, we've developed within Interlochen, there can be a wide range here. So you could end up going down to more of a garden product, which ends up being more attainable. I'm not sure that high rise works, doesn't really work anywhere in Denver right now, but for Cherry Creek, that would be the other extreme there. You can go with wrap and podium, which are somewhere in between. I think if you looked at garden type product, which is the density that we are looking at, we didn't try to max out density here. You end up with a lower cost of construction, which means that you have a lower rental rate. So it becomes attainable rent, right? It's a 80 to 120% AMI. I don't know whether or not this can specifically support purely affordable, light tech type housing. That is not our specialty, but we've targeted this in our density studies of what we've shown to be a lower density product, which is less expensive, which ends up having a lower rent to kind of target what we refer to within our shop as the missing middle.
And I just mentioned that because the cobblestone development we approved was for ownership, but it was in the 400s up to 500s we never see. And that made it very compelling. And I know we have a hearing coming up next where we're trying to figure out how to get that missing middle and affordable housing. And so obviously if you're able to come back with something more affordable, I'd be much more amenable to it. Because it would give us a compelling reason to change the use. I would note Broomfield, we like open space, so threatening us with open space doesn't concern me. We're okay with that. But I wanted to encourage that if you come back from this concept, if there's any way you can find it to be more affordable. Rent in Broomfield is 30% above national average. It's an expensive place to live. I don't think rents would come down because it's attractive. A lot of people want to live here. And that's the big challenge. I wanted to clarify one thing someone said, and I may have just misheard. You said the public land dedication had been met. Is that not just for this parcel, but for the whole Interlochen area, or what are you referring to?
If Mr. James is still online, he may be better able to answer this than I, but for sure, at least for this parcel. John, are you still online? Can you answer that question?
Yeah, can people hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, the concept is Broomfield's 1,000 acres, and it's got 3 9-hole golf courses. It's got all kinds of open space, and so I can't remember the time frame, but maybe 20 years ago, we agreed with Broomfield that the open space component had been met for a certain number of acres, and Broomfield's actually got those calculations. I can't tell you offhand because I've been trying to get the updated calculations. I know what they were until they developed the apartments on 400 Interlochen Crescent, but it's something like 35 acres is left. And again, I'm remembering off the top, so I could be slightly wrong, but the concept is Interlochen's got all kinds of open space, which makes it attractive for the people that live there. And it's got several parks, West Park, East Park, etc.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I want to make sure I understood correctly. But so this development, when you come back, probably will not have any open space within this or open areas within this particular development, correct? Because
That's correct.
We've met. Okay. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, staff and potential applicant, I'll say, for the presentations. I'm just going to give a comment real quick as it relates to the noise concerns. I live at roughly the area where this will be taking place at Camden Flatirons, as we've all known from previous comments. This particular area really is not all that noisy. It sits within the racetrack, as many people who know the airport very intimately like to call it, for the flight schools. And I also, to back that up, I went and pulled the 2024 noise complaint numbers because I can't find the 2025 noise complaint numbers. And if you look at the heat map of where all these complaints are coming from, there are 0 coming from this area. Because there's only a handful of planes per year that actually fly over on that north-south runway, because that runway is not used very frequently. And so I think to say that this property will be extremely noisy is not factually accurate or even on the ground accurate from those that live there. Yes, there are some airplanes, you might hear a few jets every now and again, but it is not a noisy location. So I just want to make that point very clear. Now, questions. My first question is going to go towards the public land dedication. Since, and this is probably going to be for staff, I think, since the potential applicant is under the impression that the public land dedication requirement has already been met because of previous dedications in the Interlochen area made years ago, what is the point of updating the PLD requirement in terms of the dollar amount when the public land dedication has already been met?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Ward. The public land dedication per the Interlochen PUD plan is calculated at 50-50. So 50% is taken from the public land bank and 50% is paid cash in lieu.
Okay. What exactly are we going to be using those dollar amounts for from this public land dedication requirement from the dollars?
I'm going to let Lynn Merwin answer this question.
Lynn Merwin, thank you. So the cash in lieu, when it's collected at the time of building permit, and it's calculated at that time as well. So it could be 86,000 if a permit were to be issued today. If the permit's issued in 2 years, it could very well be a different rate. And so our request is to have the rate align more with the Broomfield Municipal Code that now stipulates how the rate is calculated. But to your question, the cash in lieu fee funds go, or cash in lieu goes into a fund for open land purposes. And so, you know, as projects come online, capital improvement projects are proposed. They could be used for trails or open space acquisitions or other recreational improvements.
Okay. That's what I kind of figured, but I wanted to double check and make sure. I will just say, I don't necessarily think we should be using new developments to pay for existing and open space and upgrades to trail infrastructure or whatnot. That's the same suburban mentality that has gotten us to the same point where we were with our water infrastructure. I think those that live here who are paying the open space sales tax are the ones that should be contributing to it, and not those who are new residents because they don't have access to it right now. My next question is for the developer, potential developer or potential applicant. In your response to, I believe, Councilmember Cohen, when you talked about kind of a garden variety development, can you give us like a more concrete example so that way we have a really good understanding of what that looks like? Would just for example, the Camden Flatiron Apartments that is somewhat in between the two parcels you are potentially seeking for a rezone, would that be more of that type of development, or is that a different type of development that you have envisioned?
Yeah, so the best example that I can think of is 400 Interlochen, but without as much of, not as much of a parking structure. So if you drive by that product right there.
That's Elmwood, correct?
Elmwood, correct. So
Thank
that's a hybrid product. So what happens is that parking structure ends up making that cost a little bit more. That's the way that you fit that onto that site. If you take that parking, you end up having multiple buildings that are disjointed, and then you've got that parking spread out. That ends up bringing the cost down. So obviously we can tailor this to what's important to the community.
So late.
And in the group here. But ultimately, it's a version of that where you've got split buildings and you've got, you don't have the structured parking. There was also another comment I think that was made earlier around the noise. At that specific property as well, we have disclosures in all the leases. So every resident has to sign a disclosure as well. We've taken that into consideration. We take that very seriously, obviously supporting the airport, but it's also very important to us as the owners that we deliver a proper experience. And so in that property, we found ways to mitigate that in totality, which I think you've seen with the lack of any sort of noise complaints. But I'm not sure we can certainly give you examples of what that product could look like. In the Camden, I got to look at that. It's probably that with split buildings, and then parking spread out.
Yes, okay. That is just wanted to make sure I was thinking of the same thing you were saying. I will be quite honest, I don't favor that type of development. From a urban development perspective and a walkability and bikeability, I mean, we had comments about, the heat continuing to put impervious surface that is only useful for a car is going to continue to contribute to greenhouse gas emissions, just the heat island effect in and of itself. And I'm going to say, just kind of my closing statement, I think it's time to relook at what Interlochen is supposed to be. And I think you're at kind of an opportune time to kick off those conversations, and you also are kind of in an inopportune time because what that vision now looks like could be completely different. So that's all I have to say, Mayor. Thank you.
Can I respond to that as well? So the industry is absolutely going that way, right? Thinking about carbon, thinking about the impact. There are mitigants that can be done there that actually don't cost a tremendous amount of money. So think of the landscaping opportunities. Think of some of the carport opportunities. Think of taking cobblestone, right, and utilizing those surfaces to connect buildings versus asphalt and concrete. It's just prudent development, right? So instead of stripping it down to bare bones, you add a little bit more in. You can still get the attainable housing, and you can still get quality design that does focus on carbon. So from our perspective, as a global developer, we take that on. And again, we're not necessarily the developer here, but in the industry, there are a lot of people thinking of it that way for those exact reasons. So absolutely heard. We absolutely agree with you.
Councilmember Henkel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I understand the need for this. That seems like there's a historical value in this property being moved somehow. I do want to just get some more historical value of the area. Maybe staff could answer this first question. Is this particular area a food desert? And would this development maybe trigger something where we could not have a food desert? Or where?
Lynn Merwin. So we don't look at food deserts specifically today in the planning department. I would say though, anecdotally, I've heard that it is a food desert. And, you know, I think other than adding rooftops, as they say, that's probably the best thing you can do to contribute toward creating the density needed to attract a supermarket, a smaller scale independent shop, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I try to look at developments in a way that, you know, what could come next after that and what this could trigger. So thank you. From the applicant, I'm just curious as to what it looked like to try to find commercial. And if you have that data, particularly where you looked, how you looked. We're often up here on the dais trying to make these decisions, and we understand what you guys have done. But at the same time, we don't always know exactly what has been done to make sure that it is commercial. And so what outreach efforts have you done? You're not the only applicant that I asked this question to.
Yeah, so we've got an extensive network of brokers. We also have relationships with economic development councils. We also have nationwide and global occupier relationships. So an example, I'm not going to use a name, but there's a confidential bank right now that is looking to be in Colorado. We will put sites in front of them. That specific search has now narrowed down to Cherry Creek. This was a site of discussion, which was instantly dismissed, didn't meet the criteria. That's a recent example. We also talk day in and day out with the brokerage community, right? So where that resides, right? You're trying to get to a pre-lease perspective or understand a market where you could go spec so that you actually see the market coming to you, or in a perfect environment, get the entire building as a build-to-suit. So those individuals are representing those occupiers in that market. So there's relationships there. Within the economic development councils, it's a similar fashion, but this has been presented, I mean, many a times a year, over and over again for 2 decades, in an effort to try to bring those groups in with very little success. There are two groups, partners, and then the pipe company, I think Viega, I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank there. Did I get that right? Viega. We put this in front of them as well, right? Partners wanted a little bit more topography, beautiful, phenomenal deal. So we've done anything and everything we can. I would say that leading into COVID, it's probably a different dialogue here, where the thesis just took too long. It wasn't successful, but that didn't mean that there wouldn't be demand ultimately in sort of the office space. Post-COVID, there's nothing. I mean, we've tried over and over again, and we can't get traction whatsoever. So it's a myriad of channels across internal relationships, EDCs, brokerage, signs. I mean, you name it, just trying to take every angle under the sun.
Okay. And then what is preventing this development from being maybe commercial on the bottom and housing on top? We know, Europe is basically built on that model. What would that look like for that area? Is there any interest in that area for that type of model or no?
We haven't seen it, right? So we've looked at components of that. When you start mixing uses together on top of each other, it actually ended up being a way to lose a lot of money when that's sort of happening. So in suburban environments, you want to spread them next to each other, and then you want them to be complementary. Obviously, an office use and a residential use are certainly complementary there. There isn't enough density on the site to do that prudently. In addition, we don't see the demand. And then if we were to say, let's make, say, a ground floor plan, ultimately ended up being commercial use, build that out of concrete podium, we just added a bunch of costs, that'd be done on a speculative basis. And in doing so, the success of that would hinder on whether or not you could get ultimate investment buy-in on that. And we don't see any investors agreeing to that, nor do we see the demand. So we don't think we could prove that up. We did look at that in a little bit of a different variation, where it was not quite pure office. It was more of like R&D as well, and then office above. And we've gotten no traction on that front either.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, I'm not opposed to this. I will say that there will need to be the case for, and I appreciate Councilmember Ward's answer on the noise mitigation. Sounds like there's not a lot of complaints in that area. I do like the fact that you have, at least informed consent is what we like to call it with like oil and gas, let's say. But we like to, know that people are just informed before they move in because we've had many issues with the airport. And then lastly, I would like to just make sure that we do have more walkability and just more access to that area for transportation. How close is it to the mall and to any sort of retail?
So it would be, I don't know exact mileage. I would guess a mile. Anybody else has a thought there, give or take, but feels probably appropriate. If you look at those pockets, right, it's not just the mall. You've got these little outlets of sort of strip retail, and there's a significant vacancy there. I do think looking at that, right, you could take a trail pretty easily to get there. That's in my mind a pretty significant benefit right there, or go through the neighborhoods on bike. But it's not, it's not going to be the same walkability as a super urban dense environment. You also have, the Scottish pub up the hill, which has, I think, the highest Scotch menu of anywhere else in Colorado, which is pretty unique. So there are some unique elements and attributes, but the density required for that is just significantly higher, right? Like Cherry Creek is probably on the smallest scale of where that's accomplished. And that's because you also see people coming inbound. If you look at examples of really successful mixed-use walkable environments, it's typically in environments where there aren't cars, like as much reliance on cars, and there's a lot more density. And so it's a really tricky fulcrum to balance. And we've tried that. We looked at one point the retail parcel plus other uses, and we shopped really hard for retail because we also thought it could candidly be a opportunity for an office tenant, right? You start to say this is mixed use, you bring that in, and we got zero traction. We couldn't get it done.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you do come back and you do apply, I would like to see how this kind of benefits the financial status of the surrounding businesses, how people could access that, how they could access transportation, the outdoors, if we can have any, more land in that area for people to play. I would appreciate that. So I'm not opposed to this. I just want to see how it benefits us, other than the fact that it's not developable any other way. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to city staff and our developer for the care that's gone into planning for this. I want to explore a thread that Councilmember Hinkle and others have already brought up, but I first want to say that I share others' concerns about the fiscal impact, and frankly, the 17 negative comments on voice were a bit concerning. All that to say, I think it's important that we get this area right. And so kind of one comment that I have is in the memo, it noted that it's really close to those offices, and employers indicated that staff are interested in walking to dining and retail close by. So I see that there might be possibility for this corner being vibrant mixed use that perhaps is tailored to that smaller population that is close by right there. Our caller even is a resident who mentioned interest in being in a live, work, play area right there. So I'm hoping that city staff specifically can, in light of these comments that have been made by the developer about retail availability or viability, I'm wondering if you can speak to the vision that we had when the comp plan designated this area as mixed use, and how things have changed since then that either close doors or might give you some vision towards a pathway for being able to sustain some retail or commercial in specifically these parcels.
Ms. Merwin, you can start that, and then I'll fill in the gaps.
Sorry, I didn't. Do you want to take it?
I'll start it, and then I might phone my friend, Mr. Romine in the back. We've had this conversation ad nauseum over the last 4.5 years. So as the applicant had indicated, post-COVID, it was a game changer. And not just for how people activate or gather, but also how I disagree a little bit with the notation that office is dead, it will continue to be dead, and primarily the reason is AI. We're not experiencing that yet. That's not to say that we aren't preparing for what that outcome looks like to be able to be flexible, particularly in Interlochen. But the applicant's also correct that that delta continues to grow post-COVID for what pencils and what doesn't pencil. And so ensuring that not only in Interlochen, but throughout Broomfield, when we're looking at there's about 20% left, we're looking at a lot of infill development. We're looking at those opportunities, as Councilmember Ward had said. I think he's really hitting on something important, and that is, how do you recreate a space that is post 15 years, given the economic circumstances of what used to be determined to be a hot retail corner was based on a whole host of other things happening or not happening. We see it up north in Baseline continuously. And what that adjustment requires, and the level of risk is much higher now than it used to be, because we have so much less opportunity to regain those revenue losses. So particularly when we're looking at whether it's mixed use, whether it's distributed affordable housing, the applicant had indicated that if it has to be distributed, they can't make it pencil. I mean, we're hearing that more and more from a variety of developers. So Councilmember Brown, to make a long story long, but fully informed, the reliance on mixed use to be able to cover the gap for residential by having the top and bottom is becoming less and less likely, even when you're on a hot corner, even when you have the capability to have a ripple effect and that magnet of what is that hub. So when you're looking at a tipping point, 4,000 generally is the hot number for units before you get a grocery store. Is it an automatic? Absolutely not. Is it something that we chase? No, we don't. So again, it's one of those, each one of in the totality of circumstances, those questions become more and more remote, more and more complex, and more difficult to answer. There isn't something that is going to automatically trigger anything, regardless of what community you're in. So retail, 3.5 years ago, we would have thought we were in the twilight zone to be able to say retail is hot, retail is happening, but it is. I mean, we're seeing a lot of opportunities with retail, and not just at Flatirons, but kind of holistically. So it's hard to say what it was designed to be 20 years ago, what the implications of COVID were, and how do we use that historical knowledge to make decisions based on today, because it's just so vastly different. And it's not even a crystal ball anymore. So that forecasting becomes more and more difficult, which is why we look at expenditures versus revenue.
Thank you for speaking to that. I guess I would appreciate clarification if the language from the memo where there was indication of how employers are representing their staff's interest in living, dining, and shopping close by where they work. Is that information recent? Have we surveyed employers in that area recently?
Mr. Romine, do you want to talk a little bit about the AECom? I don't know if Mr. Smith wants to come up or not specifically. I think we're going to continue to hear that. Employers want folks that, I mean, we heard it at Interlochen right now, right? I mean, so even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, the ideal design in a community is live, work, play, right? It was a moniker. So yeah, employers think and know just anecdotally that if you have somebody that lives 2 blocks away and they can walk to work, the likelihood they're going to be late, the likelihood they're not going to show up is remote, right? The likelihood that they will be happier eating at a restaurant and then going to work and then walking home, it makes sense that it would be consolidated. Mr. Romine?
Thank you, Manager Hoffman, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. So we have heard this as a constant observation from CEOs and senior management in various businesses within the Interlochen area throughout a number of years. Robert actually is going to have another group meeting with a bunch of businesses in a few weeks, I believe, if I recall. And so it's been that. If you recall from the ACOM study, one of the things that we've heard, and I think I'm sure my colleagues at Hines would agree with this, is the amenitization is oftentimes a key selling point or key leasing point for many businesses when they're looking at sites. And that's one of the weaknesses within the Interlochen area, is some of those buildings are multi-decade old and they don't have the same level of amenities. So how that amenity comes in, whether that be in a single parcel was something. I know Hines, I worked with the Hines folks about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, right before COVID was really getting going, about a possible of a retail site with multiple restaurants. Obviously didn't move forward at the time. And so those types of things can help and can be a benefit. I would point out, as Manager Hoffman indicated 3-4 years ago, nobody thought retail would come back. Obviously, we're seeing retail come back. It's one of the strongest asset classes, real estate asset classes here in this part of the metro area. One of the weakest right now, interestingly enough, on the residential side is multifamily apartments. As we're talking to an awful lot of the developers who have approvals from City Council for developments, they're pushing them back a year, 2 years, 3 years. And so we're seeing that. The greatest demand on the residential side is actually in that mid-density level, those townhomes. And so, you know, as always happens, whether it be the commercial marketplace or the residential marketplace, there are ups and downs and things go through cycles. So this is something that I'm sure the folks at Hines, the folks who may be potential developers of this site, it will likely be different than what is being talked about tonight, exactly what the relationships with, what those prices may be. But that is probably what is happening right now is we're in a market transition. Many of you may have seen the Denver Business Journal wrote an article. It's been picked up by the national business journals related to the return to office and how Denver's trailing most other metropolitan areas. Do we think we're ever going to be back to the 2019 levels of offices? Probably not. Those days are long gone. We are always going to see hybrid in some form. We have, as pointed out in our study that AECOM did, it may be 3 days a week, it may be 4 days a week. So how this all translates and how we see it moving forward, we're going to learn a lot more in the next couple of years. Number of the firms, the high-tech firms, are oftentimes the ones that have cited that they want people back in the office. That includes many firms that are located within Broomfield. Vail Associates, as an example, has people coming back on a more regular basis. So to be able to sit here today and say this is what the demand is going to be may be difficult. Mixed use and the way that it's been kind of brought together, as pointed out, it may not be a vertical orientation. It may not be 1 floor or 2 floors of one type and a different, but it may be side by side. And so that may be how we see mixed use come forward in the Interlochen area as we're going forward. And quite frankly, for those of you who've been here for a number of years, Interlochen was primarily all office, some tech and some other things and some light production space and very little residential. So Broomfield has, over the last few years, this council and the previous councils have approved an awful lot of housing into Interlochen to create that mixed use environment more wholly. I leave it at that, but that kind of gives you the summary of the marketplace as we understand it from both talking to firms as well as what we're seeing. And I'm not sure that, you know, that I don't know if that is a misrepresentation or my myopic view, but that seems to be what we're hearing from multiple studies.
No, I really appreciate that. And actually, sorry, Mr. Romine, if you will entertain one more question from me. I'm curious if you would just say that you agree with the statement that was previously made that there is no demand and it would be unsuccessful in today's climate.
Immediately today, a retail center at that site probably would be very difficult to get developed and to get the financing. I don't disagree with that. Where it might be in a year or 2 years, I can't speak to it. As we have seen 3 years ago, we had to do an awful lot to make sure Flatirons Crossing came alive. The reference to the large amount of vacancy up in that area is primarily that's the Cronky owned development, and they are basically moving forward with a mixed use, and they're switching out most of that into residential. So it's actually not even available for releasing, as we found out. So, it's where they are in their progress within their redevelopment of that area, and that's something that that group has been bringing forward at the Flatirons Marketplace.
Great. I really appreciate everyone's responses, and those are all my questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Anderson.
All right, thank you. I don't have much more to add to this discussion. I want to go back to the airport because as I read through I might be missing this documentation that you have that is different than what's in our packet. But I represent residents living by the Erie Airport. We hear, it's like a different airport, but similar concerns. And one of the things is if there'll be an navigation agreement, but that doesn't trickle down to the renters. That's only a recommendation. There's not to say that you're going to be, whoever the ultimate developer is going to be may not even pass that information on. It's just a recommendation. The airport flight patterns change over time. Something that changed at the Erie Airport recently, and these things happen at RMMA too, is they brought in helicopter tours and helicopter training. And all of a sudden you go from not just the flight patterns, but you also now have helicopter noise, and helicopters are very noisy. So there's no guarantees that doesn't change with time. Closing of the runway 312 is not guaranteed yet. And it specifically states RMMA does not recommend residential uses for these sites and indicates there will still be significant air activity above these sites. And so this doesn't sound to me like it's time to make that bold assumption that this is going to happen and that there will not be noise because things change. And the sound attenuation of 25 dBA is only when you're inside your apartment with your windows closed. So I'll leave it at that. I am not in favor of rezoning based on the location of the airport. And I also think it would be incredibly wise to go out and really listen to the residents in Camden and that are already expressing differing views and start to think about what does that future look like and what types of businesses would they utilize, because that small cornerstone grocers, small corner grocers, that is like a thing that really needs to come back if we really want to make this a walkable community. There's yoga studios and nightlife and all these opportunities that I feel like we're on the verge of seeing again. So before we jump to the conclusion that only residential can go there, I think there's a greater conversation to be had with those residents. But I do hope we find a way to move forward with this property. So I'll leave it at that and appreciate this opportunity to provide feedback.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple questions directed at staff. We talked earlier about the 23% vacancy in Broomfield for commercial and office property. Do we have a sense of what the rental vacancies are, either in Broomfield as a whole or in Interlochen specifically?
Residential?
Sorry, for rentals. What are the rental vacancy rates?
For commercial or for
Oh,
residential?
residential, sorry.
For residential. Don't know if we have that. Mr. Smith or Mr. Romine?
Okay. And then you had mentioned, Director or Manager Hoffman, that it would take roughly 4,000 units to support a grocery store, given our past experiences trying to negotiate such things. And I'm remembering that there's a proposed Whole Foods up in the baseline area. And so clearly they've got enough capacity there to support such a thing. What density are we at in the Interlochen area, and how far away are we from the possibility of having something like that?
We were just going back and forth on that exact question, Councilmember Peterson. So If you count between Arista and Interlochen, over the last 5 years, as the council members that have been on this dais for a long time, the approvals were fast and swift and many. So to your question about the vacancy, it would obviously make a difference. And we're looking at about 4,000 total units that have been built, and other permits that have already been approved.
So we're already close.
We're close.
Okay.
Yeah, and so keep in mind, again, managing this expectation from baseline as well as from other conversations that we're having, even internal to Broomfield, about what it looks like to bring, whether it's a Marzik's Fine Foods, or everybody's favorite. I know I'm going to start getting text messages as soon as I say this, but Trader Joe's. There's a lot of other things other than the number of rooftops that are there, right? Locations, access, lights.
Just because we hit that number doesn't mean a new level
Yeah, it doesn't mean
unlocked
we
for us.
can go out and market and say, hey, guess what? We've got a great spot for you. So there's a lot of other things in addition, even with the Whole Foods. There are criteria. So a grocery store it's not just going to sit there, right? You have to have other anchors with that grocery store. They like to determine what some of those anchors are. It's a very complex menu of things that need to occur.
Okay, that's helpful information. Thank you very much. That's all.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from my colleagues? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to? You're good? All right, well, I have a couple of questions because I get the financial analysis and looking at revenue from a zoning change in a more holistic way in terms of the revenue that's going to be injected into the community with new residents. We get that. We talk about it and we consider it. It's all, the long-range financial plan is not such a rock solid way of evaluating it. But the reason I bring this up is because counties especially are facing huge budget deficits. Like the state, it's trickled down to us. And so we have to really look at every project through a lens of the impacts to our ability to provide services. And this council is obviously not opposed to rezoning. We did one last week for a for sale product, which, paired homes, which something we just don't see. We don't get enough of those products, that missing middle. So we approved that rezoning, even though there was community pushback. It was filling a gap that we definitely need to fill. So this is where this is a little bit of a departure. And I'll ask you, City Manager Hoffman, we know that residential units cost us money. They do not provide enough property tax revenue in return for the amount of the cost of the level of services that we provide. Can you expand on that and how it would relate to the multifamily burden?
Well, Council will recall that we have created the housing graphic where we separate. And then just recently, we included all of the pieces that we do below the surface. So all of the enterprise and infrastructure is what we now consider to be the garage. And the house is those services, police courts, human services, park rec, open lands. Each one of those layers comes with a dollar figure. And so when we look at the single family homes, when we add up all of those costs, it's about $6,500 per rooftop for a single family home. And then it generates about $3,200. So the difference between 6,500 and 3,200 is about 3,300 is the delta. That's the gap. That's why when council considers, when we do our fiscal analysis, covering that gap is only done, it's not done by adding more residents, it's done by the commercial. So maintaining that differential. Take the conversion aside, when you're looking at multifamily units, instead of the $3,300 gap between the services and what they make, or what they generate, it's about $1,800
Per unit.
per unit. And so that's part of the long-range financial plan, to be able to say, does the immediate density and gathering offset those costs? That's really the question before council every time we come. And does the council priorities play a bigger role than the offsetting nature of the finances?
So when someone says growth comes with the cost, and there, what is the cost then? What is the extra burden of adding, we've grown so much, we're adding so much more residential. What does that cost look like on services?
Well, it's again, we're getting ready to have the budget conversation with council as we're entering into 2027. And we're maintaining current service levels, which if you look at any other community, their house graphic is going to look very different than Broomfield's because of the level of service that we provide. It's expensive. Having a 40% open space goal, it's expensive. It makes all of the rest of the land much more expensive, which means affordable housing is much more expensive, which means it's more expensive for the developers to develop, whether it's residential or commercial. So being mindful, I would love to be able to say that, you know, we can absorb more without having that offset. And council will hear as we move into the budget, that isn't the case.
All right, well, thank you for that. But I mean, I appreciate my colleagues' input, and I'm still torn on the compatibility because of the airport. We are the ones that get their complaints. Not y'all. So, and it's a lot lately. There's 4 flight schools that haven't stopped growing, and there's nothing that we can do to stop that. So I will always struggle because I am on the receiving end of those complaints. And I just, you know, I don't know if I want to subject other people to that. But I mean, I'm definitely for the product and the housing, but everything's just not so black and white right now. There's just a lot of other things to consider. But thank you for bringing this forward, and we'll hopefully see you again. Absolutely. Come on up to the mic.
Question on what the market vacancy was for residential.
Yes.
So Broomfield's got approximately 11,000 apartment units, give or take. Vacancy right now is between 11 and 12%.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for being with us this evening. Seeing the time, 7:53, let's go ahead and take our 10-minute recess now. So we'll be back at 8:03. Thank you. Welcome back. Welcome back to part 2 of our study session. We are now moving forward with our Housing Division update for 2026. We're going to hear from Ms. Tessier regarding housing programs and initiatives, as well as a detailed overview of the current and projected funding structures supporting these programs. Council has a copy of the agenda memorandum, which I'll ask our staff to summarize.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Ms. Tessier is ready and prepared, and we've dry run and we're ready to roll. Ms. Tessier.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity here. Sharon Tessier, Housing Policy Manager. And I just want to say Lisa Soccer is here, Housing Programs Manager, and our Director is back there. And I also need to do a shout out to Chelsea and Diana, who are our team that makes our team exceptional. So tonight's focus will be on to share updates regarding who the Housing Division is. And I know you guys have another meeting, so I am going to talk really fast, trying to get as much information as I can. So I will say next slide, please. This is just a reminder of who we are and the approach that we take. We are a person-centered, strength-based approach with our focus on veterans, people with disabilities, and seniors are our targeted population. The upstream approach is where CCOB, you'll see most of our programs are geared toward the upstream and the midstream approach. And then we have our downstream approach that our Fearless partners are working to fill in those gaps in the downstream, like fish and refuge and almost home. So next slide. This is where housing intersects, and the more, departments and organizations that I talk to, this is kind of how I laid out how housing fits into many, many different domains. And so you can see that the first domain is social and well-being. The second is infrastructure, where we intersect with utilities, planning, transportation. Third is civic community, where intersections with police, library, public services, education, and the last, and these are not in any particular order, economic vitality, partnerships, and in order to address the widest needs as possible. Next slide, please. So speaking of casting the widest need, this slide shows once again how housing is a cross-cutting opportunity that no one entity can address alone. It takes a multitude of partners. Some of them are here. I'm very grateful for your willingness to be here. We've broken housing down into 3 buckets. By no means is this the end all be all. This is just an easy way to digest this information, particularly for those council members who are newer in your seat. So we have the 0 to 30% AMI buckets, and you can see, and the 31 through 60 and the 61 through 120. Now, the first 2 columns are considered your low moderate income, and the third column is your middle income. And there are 4 or 5 rows that show who tackles kind of what or who addresses what in the housing world. And you can see that the housing division cuts across all 3. And we found this out through some of the programs that we run, where 44% of our participants fall within the 0 to 30% AMI. And then we have our development and gap financing. Department of Human Services, we couldn't do this work without them. They create the benefits and the services. Our severe weather activation, they support SWAP in their endeavors to get people who are experiencing homelessness sheltered during the harsh weather. Broomfield Housing Alliance, I just wanted to give a pretty big shout out to them for their housing choice vouchers. When they started in 2022, we had about 20 vouchers. Now we're up to 80 vouchers, which is no small feat. So thank you, BHA. Other nonprofits and faith-based communities, we're just so grateful for the work that we can continue to do together. And our gaps have not changed much since last year. They remain roughly 30 to 50% AMI housing is where we're seeing a big need. And then, of course, our permanent and transitional housing, we do not have here in Broomfield at all. Next slide. These are our funding buckets. And so from state, federal, and local funding, just kind of wanted to give you a quick overview of where we get our funds to fund some of our programs. Next slide. And I'm going to go off my notes because I'm going to hurry up. All right. So what we're trying to do here is looking at our policy and our revenue shift. The inclusionary housing ordinance is working. In my last presentation to you all, you were aware that the Housing Development Fund, through the programs that we've created, has quickly been depleting. And we will be entering 2027 with 1.7 million. And our programs, along with our funding to BHA, is around 1.2 million. And the current operational spending levels will lead to a significant depletion by the end of 2027. And so the strategic directive is to look at how our programs are funded. Next slide, please. So the big ask, and by no means is this lost, and by no means do I envy the position the council continues to be in, where there are some hard decisions that need to be made. And I just want to honor that and recognize those hard decisions. What the housing division is moving toward is utilizing $640,000 from the general fund to our housing programs to support two basic programs. And I'll go into the why in just a minute. And by preserving that HDF capacity, we can realign our HDF fund for development exclusively. I'll go to the next slide. Next slide. These are the list of our programs. Currently, we serve over 1,300 residents per year. That doesn't include the residents that we support by building new development. These are just our programs. And it does not include all the residents that BHA assists at this point either. So from home repairs to Sunshine Home Share, which allows senior homeowners to rent room in their homes to adults at any age to offset rent in exchange for services like taking out the trash or shoveling the driveway or doing things that like our Broomfield Pals kind of works toward. And then we have Mobile Home Park Initiative program, which supports all mobile home park residents, and then down payment assistance for the middle income folks. And this is where you see our proposition for BOA rental funding to be transitioned from the PPTR program into the BOA program. And next slide. I shared that we have over 1,300 households supported annually. We have 400 income aligned units anticipated through 2027 coming online. And the way the housing division works is that we're able to leverage $4 to $10 for every dollar that we spend or that we get. So there's a great return on investment for the work that we do. Many of our partners who are in this work, Human Services and Broomfield Fish and BHA, also leverage between $4 and $6 for every dollar that they get. Next slide, please. Authorized is about 6,500 residential units with almost 14% being income-aligned housing. My statistics for the vacancy rate were about 6 or 7%, not 11%, and that's based on like a few different algorithms and research that I did. So I just kind of wanted to make that clarification. Now, it could go up, but as it is right now, we're closer to 6 or 7%. Development, Broomfield is so committed and created these standardized templates utilizing fee reductions, use tax waivers, and public land cash exemptions. And the next slide will show kind of some examples about what an average development costs, the affordability period, the loan grant amount, and these loan grant amounts can come from our Housing Development Fund, which we supported Crosswinds, Northwest with, as well as Harvest Hill. And Harvest Hill also got a $2 million grant from More Housing Now, which is a Prop 123, because we opted into Prop 123. You can see that we've leveraged between $5 and $10 for every development here. And we've also 15 plus 8, $23 million in investment for affordable housing. And that includes both foregone revenue in your like property tax and fee waivers, along with property tax waivers. Next slide, please. Despite all the work that we're doing and all of our partners doing this work, renters are still heavily impacted. 32% of Broomfield residents are considered cost burdened. Renters, 50% of the renters are spending over 30% of their total income on rent. There's an inflation drag where homeowners experience higher home valuations, home insurance, utility spikes, and asset maintenance fees. Which is pretty much why council directed for the PPTR and the URAF, right? And then also there's some deficits in the 30 to 50% AMI, and 25% of Broomfield's population faces a critical deficit of local inventory that they can afford. Next slide, please. So this is the juicy slide. This is where we are asking for the transition of the PPTR funding to go into the BOA expansion, which is Broomfield Older Adult Assistance Program. And if you consider the BOA program as having two arms, one is for homeowners and one is for renters. The BOA for renters is currently the seniors coming off of the TBR program, or the Temporary Based Rental Assistance Program. And there's 21 seniors that will be on that program, and they are also encouraged to go on all of the housing, affordable housing. As we get the messages, they have to apply for all the affordable housing locally. And if some of the seniors don't mind moving to Trinidad, then we'll make sure that they are able to sign up for the Trinidad openings when housing vouchers come up. And then also look at assisting them into moving and transitioning into assisted living as they need it. Now, the BOA for homeowners would take the place of the PPTR and utilize that funding to support the same population of folks. It would be seniors 65 plus, veterans with 80% disability, and people with 100% documented disabilities, who are the most vulnerable in our community right now. This dynamic allows the changes based on funding, updated data, relevant community need. There's going to be cost of living rises, and it's not necessarily tied to one specific spike in either property taxes, because if you look, the property tax partial refund was really driven by the spike that we had, and it was meant to be a temporary program. So we're looking at trying to transition that into a more permanent program to support these seniors and others who are severely cost burdened. Next slide, please. This would be a it's instead of a first come, first serve like the PPTR program was, this would be more of a way to ensure that those at the lowest AMI would be our highest priority. And Lisa worked, we both worked on this really diligently, and what we came up with was a tiered approach to how to support seniors, because we took the average PPTR refund, which is about $800, $1,000. It was a $1,000 cap. So we thought the 0 to 30% AMI would have a one-time per year $1,100 flat grant that would help offset the costs of living. It could be, and we would kind of open it up after they get their property tax bill and things like that. The 31 to 50% AMI would get a flat grant at $800, and then the 51 to 60 would get a flat $600 grant. And those that are currently at the 61 to 80% would be ineligible, just to match a lot of our other programs, being the most vulnerable and those at the most need would be the 0 to 60% AMI. Next slide, please. I know I rushed through that, so we're here to answer any questions. The other things that the housing team has been up to is our work with Prop 123, specifically Senate Bill 26040, reaching out to the legislative committee, working with Danae, and a shout out to Danae if you can hear me, yay. Really appreciate all of the work that we did to move the needle. It wasn't quite as much as we really wanted, but we got the front end debt to income ratio lifted from 35 to 38 with a maximum overall debt to income of 48 for our potential home buyers for the down payment assistance program. Two other things coming down the pike, and you'll hear from us again, is that Root Policy Research Inc. is doing 2 more updates for us, the housing needs assessment and the inclusionary housing ordinance. So by fall of this year, we'll get more information on the updated housing needs assessments and inclusionary housing ordinance to see if our calculations are in the right place. Immediate priorities, clearly you will be looking at the budget in September, and also future discussions, which housing has been involved in, and I know council has been involved in since way back when, how to best prioritize limited resources in a way that maximizes community impact, protects the most vulnerable, and preserves long-term financial stability. And I think my last slide is the summary, hopefully laid out for you to shift 640,000, and how we came up with 640,000 was the PPTR was $600,000, and the 40 comes from the senior Sunshine Home Share program, taken out of the Housing Development Fund into the general fund. By doing so, we would end with a balance of $836,000 in 2027 and be able to carry some of those programs into 2028 to return the HDF to its true architectural purpose, which is to gap finance and acquisition of land for income-aligned housing, and then the implementation of BOA, so retiring the PPTR into a more general housing program, not a property tax program or a utility program, but specifically housing and an ongoing. And so it would be to secure 2027 programmatic transition of 640,000 to general fund budget and advance BOA policy adoption. So I will stop there and
Ready for questions?
ready for questions.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Tessier. Go to my colleagues now. Any questions, comments, feedback? Councilmember Warden.
I'll take the leap and go first. Thank you very much for the presentation, Ms. Tessier, and thank you very much for the response to my questions that I sent in earlier. I greatly appreciate it. I just have a couple kind of minor questions based on the memo and the presentation. So in the memo, you guys kind of detailed more than kind of that chart that outlines the different programs that are available for housing related funding and where that funding comes from and how much is it for that funding, et cetera. But in the memo, specifically for the, there we go, the down payment assistance program, it says we're increasing the funding for the admin portion by 75,000 from 2026 to 2027 is what I read. Why was there no money allotted for admin in 2026, but now needs to be allocated 2027?
I love that question. And can you see I'm like really excited to answer it. So back to the legislation that just passed on Prop 123 down payment assistance. Broomfield engaged with the legislative leaders of that Prop 123 saying we are having a really hard time being able to expend our down payment assistance award. And we got it in 2 tranches. $750,000 is our first tranche. And so our match is that $75,000. This started in October of 2024, and we've gotten 5 down payment assistance through October 24 to now in June of 2025. With this increase to 38% front-end DTI, what we're hoping is that we get the second tranche of funding. So we didn't have to pay that admin match of $75,000 in 2026 because we never got that second tranche. So next year we're truly optimistic that we can spend down that money because, and if we don't, then we give it back and we don't spend that $75,000 as an admin match.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks for that explanation. You know, I think you did a great job in presenting kind of where we are or where we have been, where we are, and where we should be, or where staff thinks we should be going. And so I don't really have any other questions per se. But I do agree with kind of the outline that staff has provided to council and the direction that we should be going, particularly in knowing that the IHO funds really should be there for either matching dollars with Prop 123 or, you know, LIHTC funding, et cetera, or being used to, you know, land bank for future projects, et cetera. So I just want to say I agree with the direction that staff is requesting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Twist.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation. And I want to say how much I really appreciate the thoughtful and strategic use of our Broomfield dollars to leverage outside funds to provide such a variety of programs. The support that so many of our residents need, and it's not one thing, it's lots of different things, which is really complex and hard to balance, but thank you. So I'm wondering about the PPTR and how many people were on it or received that in previous years and what the difference is with the categories now, how many were in that like 60 to 80% who will not receive funds under the BOA?
So the 61 to 80%, there were 17% of the 950 or so, 970 or 983, right around that number that we served last year. And currently we're at about 644. And we're right at that same percentage of residents who are in that category.
So 17% of those?
17%, yeah.
So I'm sorry, can someone math for me? What's the number on, like, how many will not be receiving assistance now that were in previous years?
So it's approximately, so out of total, just to be sure that we all understand, it's 0 to 30% is 44% of the people that we serve with these programs. The 23, the 17% consisted of approximately 28 individuals.
In the memo, you mentioned that we were going to be getting an updated housing needs assessment and inclusionary housing ordinance analysis later this year. Do you know when that is expected?
Yes, so we expect to get the first draft in the beginning of August, and we have created a slot for September to come and share those results.
And this is the same company that did the 23
Correct.
assessment, so they'll be,
Very familiar with,
yes, equal apples to apples
correct.
comparisons. Excellent. Also mentioned that identifying the additional $640,000 general fund allocation required significant organizational trade-offs, including the denial, delay, or reduction of multiple departmental program and operational requests across the organization. Can you speak to some of those? No.
I can.
Can you speak to some of those? What was denied, what was delayed, what was reduced?
We didn't put it into categories because it was it was a comprehensive, we didn't have a package that we said no to, but rather each year at this time, well, we're about 2 months ahead, but we have departments that submit, whether it's FTEs or programs or whatever their deliverables are in addition to their operational costs increasing. So I'll give you an example. We had intended on doing some vehicle replacements this year because we said no last year, and that was declined. So it's a shift across the board in order. We were trying to find 900,000, quite frankly. We had done some pretty significant whiteboard work and started with the goal of identifying from each one of those programs with the whole premise being not being relying on an unsustainable revenue stream. So we've been relying on an unsustainable revenue stream, which is counter to our philosophical approach of not building programs on one-time dollars. And so the IHO was never intended to be one-time dollars, but now we are at the mercy of development from IHO. And so we can see, again, the precipice coming in 2028. So part of the conversation with the department heads and the budgets overall, it's not done from a swift top perspective. I mean, all of us are having these conversations about where is that priority, and who is going to get the yes and who is going to get the no, and to what degree it's not a yes or a no, but it's let's look at 2028 or 2029. And this year we prioritized housing for the population that housing's identified. And the priority was also not from a return on investment perspective, but from the perspective of our senior population being our fastest growing population. And keeping people in their homes generated the most immediate return on investment.
So, okay, thank you. If we found this $640,000 by delaying, denying, reducing, how does that impact the sustainability of these programs? Will we have to continue to do that to maintain them?
Yes. It's a it's something that we've been talking about for it's a reallocation, right? So it's not even reprioritizing. We're not saying here's our 10. And these 3 things are going to become the priority. It is what isn't going to happen in order for this to happen. So, and not specifically this, but again, overall, right? So 2027 was, given we balanced the budget last year on the backs of our employees, the goal off of the top was that was not going to happen again this year. And so the premier package was, how do we get market merit for those employees, knowing where we are from a property tax decrease, which is consistent, right? There isn't going to be any kind of influx. Diversification of funds generally means you either raise taxes or you cut services or you cut employees. And generally when you cut services, you cut employees. So how do we build a sustainable future based on what the community and council indicates to staff is an important, not only expenditure, but who we are as a community. And so that's the filter through which, Councilmember Twist, we will enter and begin to execute on 2027. And those areas that we modified and declined or pushed or delayed or took out altogether will again be reviewed. We don't anticipate that we will never replace another vehicle, right? Obviously. But every year it's going to be within a constrained budget. How do we maximize our staff? How do we utilize continuous improvement so that we're able to identify those particular funds? And how do we recommend to council that we modify that as we move in the future? We're going to be having some additional conversation, 2-on-1s with what that may look like in the very, very near future, like mid-July.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Lim. Sure.
I just want to make sure that I'm answering this correctly. The 61 to 80% is actually about 100 households. Sorry, my misconception. It was 51 to 60 that it was only that small household. Sorry. 100 households between 61.
So I'll start with my question about those 100 households. So if we, at the point in time in which it is determined that this is the path for 2027, will we do proactive outreach to those 100 households specifically? I mean, like mail them, call them on the phone, make sure they answer and get the message? And because otherwise they're correctly or not correctly. I mean, I've encountered residents with even previously when we scaled down the PPTR who were making assumptions that, and they were, very upset about that those assumptions that they made could not still be followed. So I think we'll have the same thing, and I'd like to know how you're going to address that.
Yeah, great question. And we discussed this internally, and with each year, the partial property tax refund program has changed and caused confusion. And our amazing admin, Chelsea and Diana, are there specifically to support these residents and to explain how the program has changed. We have a a sheet of everyone who has been on our programs. They will be contacted. They will get a mailing to let them know that the PPTR will be retired, and programs that you once qualified for may not be in, may not happen this year.
Okay, great. That's good. That's good. I'm glad that I have that reassurance. You
And that
referred-
doesn't mean that you won't get a call because
Yeah,
they
I
may
know.
not.
Okay. I understand that. I've been around it long enough for that. The utility fund. So are we going to hear about that when we talk about the enterprise funds? Are we going, is that under the microscope now as part of the BOA?
So the Housing Division just administers the URAF program, and those funds come from a different source, the enterprise funds. And that will be if council.
It's already included.
Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem in the rates that we'll be bringing back.
Okay. Okay, great. This is a little tangent, but I've attended the BHA tour, housing tour, the other Saturday in mid-May. So that was really informative. I really enjoyed seeing those sites and that. What I was thinking about, what is our role, or do we have any role at this point in time after our investment is made in those sites? Because, I mean, the one site in particular had undergone a change of management and had a higher vacancy rate than I expected. So are we involved in that process to keep those fully utilized? Or are we completely out of the picture at this point?
No, I love that question too. We've been making extra attempts over this last year to work with the new property managers to say, hey, we're here. We have, we just went over this morning about how we're starting to add vacancies to all our networks via email, and then also have a link to the property that have vacancies. So our goal is, as the Housing Division, to help market those vacant lots, vacant units as much as possible, and to hit, places where the property managers may not be hitting. Additionally, there has been a lot of turnover over the last 3 years in property management, and it has been only recently where a lot of the property managers are more aware of how to work with income-aligned housing units and all of the restrictions or the nuances that come with it. And that's why our housing team is working very closely. And we in addition to providing or getting rent rolls that we receive from property managers to say, hey, all of these units are in alignment with our IHO and with our LIHTC, the right populations are being served. We also get to see on a month-to-month rate basis how many vacancies are and how we can push out to all of our partners and our community and the chamber now, depending on what AMI level they're at.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad there's that oversight and collaboration. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, now will anyone else? Back to you, Julie. Councilmember Twist.
Actually, I do have more questions. I just pushed
I noticed.
Yeah,
It's
but
got
I
3
do have more
stars.
questions.
Okay, well, any
okay.
first round before we go to second round, just now's the time. Thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. And thank you to the whole team. I know that you do amazing work in the community, and it is such a lift and just very complicated. I'm really curious, going back to the question of program sustainability. So for the foreseeable future, it makes sense to me the way that you've outlined, kind of narrowing the focus and making sure that those populations are served. I'm curious, going back to the slide, the table where it talked about existing gaps. what you see the city's role or like the housing department's role in, all the people in this audience and the folks who wrote into us this week saying they were really excited about this presentation and supporting this direction. How do you see that being shaped over the coming years to try to narrow those gaps even further down?
That is a lovely question. Our Housing Solutions Forum, which consists of over 40 different organizations, including faith-based, Flatirons, Habitat for Humanity, other nonprofit, and people with lived experience are all kind of working. And we're making sure that we're not duplicating efforts. And we're looking at how we can, I think, I'm not sure if you were on council when someone brought forth some of the information that was pulled about, well, I won't go there. I'm thinking more of some of the gaps that are in. I mean, it really all comes down to funding and how do we get that type of funding, what mechanisms. We're looking at leveraging federal and state dollars. We know we can't grant write our way out of this. However, we are trying to do as much as we can with as little as we get. And currently right now is where we're at, and there's an identified gap of close to $15 million for the services. Our hope is that with an upstream approach and being able to create the development and getting those 30 to 50% AMI deep affordable, that we can move people out of the downstream and midstream more into the upstream. So we're having less people downstream, right? So that's the city and county's kind of role. And then our relationships with other partners we want to stay in close collaboration with in order to make sure that no one's falling off the cliff, which we know they are, but how do we that is the $1 million question. And I can tell you there's many, many groups trying to work on that. And we would love to have you come to one of the Housing Solution Forum meeting. They're open to the public. They're every other month on the third Thursday between 3 and 5. I'll personally send you an invite if you would like.
Absolutely, please do so. Thank you for, kind of a little bit of the history and looking forward. Thank you for keeping on. I think that's kind of all we can do in this space.
Yeah, we're all locked arms, linking, and we're stronger together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess quick clarifying question. You say upstream. Does that go back to your previous comment about the most cost, or someone's comment about the most cost effective thing that we can do as a city is keep people housed in their homes as homeowners? Okay.
Yeah, so we're calling it aging in place for seniors and preventing displacement, which having a conversation with, Human Services earlier is that it's much more cost effective than to prevent displacement and promote aging in place than it is to pay or fund once they become homeless.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I wish I had better news.
Thank you. Councilmember Henkel.
Sorry.
This is 0. I've never
No, I was
seen a
looking at
0.
that like
That's new.
Julie's photo is now a 0.
Is that what happens when you use all 3 times? That's new to me.
He's ground 0.
You found something
We got
new.
to start there, right? Awesome. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this presentation, and just the shifting in the housing market itself it's very difficult. So thanks for this, sort of honest, raw outlook of this, and serving on the board, the tripartite board. I've seen us voting on federal dollars to keep the aging population in their homes, and it usually goes towards a certain area, and their rent keeps going up, it seems. How are we able to work synergistically with the tripartite board? And what does that look like federal funding wise, I noticed that there is that chart on there and like what is paying for what, but can you just explain that shift a little bit more? Because I think I'm used to that tripartite board keeping the aging population housed.
When you say tripartite board, can you tell me a little?
CSBG.
Oh, okay, okay. So using the federal dollars and
Yeah.
okay, so our federal dollars, which are CDBG, and every federal dollar comes with limitations on how you can spend them, right? And so the most effective way that we've been able to spend down our CDBG dollars is through the home repair program, which is another program that actually keeps seniors and lower income folks in their homes with that grant of close to $20,000 in home repairs that they receive. And it keeps the affordable housing stock, even though it's like naturally affordable, it keeps them in their home and it keeps that stock at affordable because once it goes to market, we'll never kind of get that back. Our home funds are through the consortium with Boulder, Longmont, and possibly other Boulder County cities will come. But currently those home dollars, it's based on population. And so Broomfield currently receives approximately $100,000 to $115,000. And what we've done in the past is use the home dollars for the TIBRA program. And the TIBRA program was helping young families. And then when COVID hit, more of the young families were taking advantage of a lot of the federal and state funding that was coming down and not moving in the TIBRA program. And so we had dollars accrued. So we started to utilize the TIBRA for seniors. Okay, so those federal dollars are more they can be for development, but we need like a lot more of those dollars in order to, and we just don't have the population and we don't have the poverty rates that federal, even though our insecurity and our right, I know you know that.
I know the federal poverty level. It makes
yeah.
me laugh and also cry.
Yes.
Fine.
Right. And I've been working with different Congress folks to hopefully get some of those numbers changed and to start looking at the cost of living, using the MIT calculator, using the Elder Index from UMass. So those are some of the things that we're working towards. So our federal dollars are very specific and work to keep seniors housed. Our Prop 123 funds state program specifically is for the down payment assistance. Now, if we were to opt in to Prop 123 for the next 3-year round, we would be able to continue, and so would our partners like BHA, be able to continue to land bank, to be able to possibly look at ADU and seeing how we could get more grant funding through the state. Currently, our only Prop 123 funds is for the down payment assistance because that's all we applied for. And we don't want to expand any programs right now. And so using our local dollars have been the most useful and the most impactful. And we're leveraging those federal dollars by not having to spend those somewhere else.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes,
and
Mr. Casey.
Councilmember Henkel, the tripartite board is a function of the Community Services Block Grant, which is administered through Human Services. And that's about $37,000. I see Lisana Munoz, our Director of Human Services, back there. It's plus or minus $37,000. And the tripartite board has the authority to direct how those funds are used. And a couple of years ago, we made the decision that those would also be used to help seniors remain in their homes. And that's not part of CDBG, it's Community Services Block Grant, but it is federally funded and it's only about $37,000. The other problem with CSBG, to Sharon Tessier's point, is the federal poverty level. It's a 200% of the FPL, which not a lot of Broomfield residents qualify for, but most of our seniors do because of how income burdened they are.
Okay, gotcha. And then one more question about did someone want to address that? Sorry. I heard a voice and I was like, what voice do I need to hear?
Lisa Soccer, Housing Programs Manager. So to answer that, they can be stacked. So Human Services works very closely with housing and supporting the similar population. So the CSBG that they use for emergency rental or so in the senior population, it can be the same people that are receiving maybe 0 to 30% housing programs as well. And we do look to help those and widen the stream that comes to them, that we're working to collaboratively together.
Okay, thank you. And then one more question about the mortgage assistance program. I think, it's hard to always gauge how many could utilize this, but what are the hurdles that people are running into? And I believe when they apply, don't they have to have zero debt, like no car debt?
It's not zero debt as long as their overall debt to income ratio does not exceed, which just got shifted. It's 48% now. So, and the front end debt to income, which is what is used to determine how much is being spent on housing alone, went from 35% to 38%. So we're looking at a 3% increase in the number of applications that we hope to get. So stay tuned. And we got an extension to keep our program going through June 30th of 2027 because of the legislative change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it for right now. I always have more housing questions, so thank you.
You know where to find me. Thank you.
0. Councilmember Twist.
Oops. Can you speak a little bit to, you said that there were like 2 arms for the owners and the renters. How many are served by each program? What's the kind of breakdown?
Yeah,
Of that.
so there's 21 served in the rental program, and those are the seniors that are coming off of TBRA. And we've capped that because their need is greater and they receive like a monthly rent subsidy. And the homeowners have clearly a little bit more asset and risk of displacement isn't as great as those seniors. And I will tell you this, the seniors on the rental program are all in low income housing already at 60% AMI, and they're literally spending 60 to 80% of their income on their rent. So it costs more. So that's why we keep less of those folks on the program and hopefully get them into more secure housing. And then there'll probably be approximately 600 to 650 on the homeowner side, the same amount that you were working with on the PPTR.
Okay. What would be the cost of keeping those roughly 100 households in the 61 to 80% in some kind of return? Do you have a?
So the idea is to retire the property.
Yes.
So you would enroll them into the BOA is what I'm hearing, the BOA home, the Broomfield Older Adult Assistance Program.
Only up to 60%, right?
Currently, that's how we're proposing it because those are the most cost burden and we're trying to focus on those who would be
Right.
displaced.
But do you have a program cost not included here of what it would cost to have that 61 to 80% included in this somehow?
I hear you. And no, we do not, but we will absolutely get that for you tomorrow.
I guess this is probably.
Unless Lisa has another answer.
Okay.
The other clarification is that this is no longer a first come, first serve. So if it's dependent on the greatest need, so that funding could conceivably hit the 0 to 50% and then be none left for the 51 to 60%.
Oh.
Because we're serving the most in need and those in risk of displacement.
Right. Okay, well, that's probably the answer to my next question, but it is, what did you want to do with $900,000 that you had to figure out what to do with 640? What was that other almost $300,000 of
Those are some of
things
our
that you
other
wanted to fund?
programs. And we were hoping to fund the majority of our programs, which we couldn't do. That's where the 900,000 came from. And so we compromised, I guess, came to a middle ground where 640 was the number we could come up with. And I will defer to City Manager Hoffman.
Not continuing to be, so for the Broomfield Housing Division programs, being fully reliant on general fund and not having a split part general fund and part IHO. So the goal was to make that transition, but we simply couldn't.
Okay. Thank you. I don't envy those decisions. That's some really hard stuff, but thank you. And like many of my colleagues, I'm very interested in continuing the conversation on how to make these programs stable and sustainable with new sources of funding or dedicated funding somehow. Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. Any other comments from my colleagues? I have a couple of questions. I guess the 640,000 in question, how did you cobble together that money in our highly constrained budget? Manager Hoffman?
There were a series of about 16 different conversations with finance. And again, the approach from a budget perspective is fundamentally, we have shifted significantly over the last 4 years. So developing this budget is not a top-down. We just don't operate that way. We don't want the departments coming in swinging for each other. They need to understand why we're making these decisions, under what circumstances, what the outcome is, what we're focused on, why we're trying to do it. So the department head meetings are important. The follow-up discussions about the trade-offs are important, and everybody participates in what that means to give up and where those funds are going to go. So again, it's not line item. We don't say, well, this is an easy line item, or this isn't it hasn't been easy to do this over the last 3 years. And so every year in a constrained environment, it becomes exponentially more difficult. Thus the upcoming conversations with council to not just find relief, but how do we build a future for Broomfield that is fundamentally fiscally responsible and sustainable?
Well, to me and to you, 640,000 is no small number. Who was around in 2018? Okay, if you're around in 2018, you would remember that our housing budget consisted only of the CDBG fund block grant. That's it. We had $50,000. That's it. And no staff, one person. So we've come a long way from just 6 or 8 years ago. God, time flew. But one day, when we were approving the budget, Councilmember Tessier at the time and we voted against the budget because there was only $50,000 for housing. We did a protest vote. And we started to have that conversation and were able to fight to get $1 million earmarked, 1 million. And that was kind of the start of where we are today. But it was not always like this. And I'm really proud of everything we've grown into and accomplished. I mean, yeah, it's hard times, but we figured out how to get here. So I know that we're going to figure out how to continue, because these programs are so important. And all the work that you all do is so important. I'm proud of Broomfield today. And I'm so proud of you. And that's all.
Thank you, Mayor Castriata. And we are so passionate, and we know that we will continue to keep finding those dollars.
I know we will. Thank you. Well, is that all from my colleagues? I didn't mean to get emotional. That concludes the agenda items for this evening's study session. Is there any business to come before the council from my council colleagues or staff? All right, there being no further business, the study session is adjourned. Council will convene for the executive session immediately following this meeting. Once the executive session is complete, council will adjourn and will not be returning to the public meeting. Thank you. Have a good night.